"You're going to be so selfish about it," my sister said, demanding my dead husband's property. I threw them out of my house. A week later, she posted lies about me. David died on a quiet Tuesday morning after fighting cancer for 18 months. A piece of me died with him that day too. I remember standing in our bedroom, staring at his side of the closet, running my fingers over his favorite sweater. The one I'd curl up in during those final weeks in the hospital when he'd gotten too thin to wear it himself. The doctors had given us 6 months. We'd stretched it to 18 through sheer stubbornness and experimental treatments that drained our savings but bought us time. Precious, painful time. Our son Noah, only 9 years old, had crawled into our bed that morning. "When's Dad coming home?" he asked, his small voice cracking. I didn't have the heart to tell him that Dad was never coming home again, not yet. Instead, I held him close, breathing in the scent of his shampoo, feeling his little heartbeat against mine. A heart that would have to learn to keep beating despite this crushing loss. I'd always known where I stood with my family. Growing up as Barbara Martin, I was forever in my sister Stacy's shadow. Stacy with her perfect grades, perfect looks, perfect life. Stacy who could do no wrong in my parents' eyes. I'd made peace with it, or so I thought. David had been the first person who truly saw me, not as Stacy's little sister or the Martins' second daughter, but as me, worthy of love without conditions. "You're not second best to anyone," he used to tell me, his eyes crinkling at the corners when he smiled. "You're my first choice every day." I called my parents when David passed. Mom answered on the 4th ring. "Barbara, what's going on?" "I'm heading out the door for Stacy's meeting with the investors." I took a deep breath. "Mom, David died this morning." A pause. "Oh, that's terrible," she said, her voice dropping an octave into what I recognized as her sympathy voice, the one she used for acquaintances and distant relatives. "How's Noah taking it?" "He doesn't know yet. I haven't." "Listen, honey, can I call you back later? Stacy's big presentation is today, and you know how important this funding round is for her startup. The whole family's going to support her." I hung up without responding, my hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped the phone. 18 months of cancer, and my own mother couldn't spare 5 minutes to comfort me on the day my husband died. David's parents arrived within hours, flying in from Seattle. They helped with everything, the funeral arrangements, taking care of Noah, making sure I ate something besides coffee and stale crackers. His mother, Janet, held me when I finally broke down while picking out David's burial suit. "He loved you so much," she whispered, her own tears soaking into my hair. So much. The funeral was set for Friday. I sent the details to my family, not really expecting a response. My father texted back a curt "we'll try" that made my stomach knot. Stacy sent a flower arrangement that arrived at the funeral home with a card reading "sorry for your loss," as if David had been a coworker rather than her brother-in-law of 10 years. Friday morning dawned bright and clear, the kind of beautiful spring day that David would have loved. The kind of day he would have insisted we spend at the park, tossing a baseball with Noah or reading under the oak trees. The day he should have had many more of. I moved through the funeral in a fog, shaking hands, accepting hugs, thanking people for coming. David had been loved by many. Our house had overflowed with casseroles and sympathy cards all week. His colleagues from the architectural firm came in a group, sharing stories about his projects, his mentorship, his terrible office coffee that somehow became a tradition. Throughout it all, I kept glancing toward the door, watching for my family. They never came. That night, after everyone had gone and Noah had finally fallen asleep clutching his father's watch, I collapsed onto our couch with my phone. I wasn't thinking clearly. Grief and exhaustion had made me reckless. I opened Instagram, a mistake I realized too late. There, at the top of my feed, was my mother's post from earlier that day. A photo of her, my father, and Stacy, champagne glasses raised in celebration. Nothing matters more than celebrating our daughter's success. So proud of Stacy for securing her first round of funding. The timestamp showed it had been posted at 2:15 p.m., exactly when I had been watching my husband's casket being lowered into the ground. I hurled my phone across the room. It hit the wall and clattered to the floor, screen cracked but still displaying that damning photo. The broken screen somehow felt appropriate, a physical manifestation of my shattered heart. This wasn't just disappointment. This wasn't just being the unfavored child. This was complete betrayal. My husband, the father of their grandson, was being buried, and they chose a business celebration instead. I didn't cry, I was beyond tears. Instead, I felt something harden inside me like concrete setting around my heart. A protective shell forming over the soft, vulnerable parts of me that had always hoped my family would someday see me, value me, love me the way parents and siblings should. David's will reading was scheduled for the following Friday. His lawyer, Michael, agreed to come to our home since I wasn't ready to leave Noah with a sitter. Janet and Robert, David's parents, arrived early to help tidy up and keep Noah occupied. The doorbell rang just as we were settling in the living room. I assumed it was Michael arriving, but when I opened the door, I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. My parents stood on the porch looking perfectly put together as always. Behind them, Stacy fiddled with her designer handbag, her eyes darting past me to peek inside the house. "Barbara, darling," my mother cooed, stepping forward to air-kiss my cheek. "We're so sorry for your loss." I stood frozen, my hand still on the doorknob. "What are you doing here?" My father cleared his throat. "We're here for the will reading, of course. We're family." "Family?" I repeated, the word tasting bitter on my tongue. "You didn't come to his funeral." "We sent flowers," Stacy interjected, as if that made everything okay. "And you know my funding meeting was that day. Mom and Dad had to be there." I wanted to slam the door in their faces. I wanted to scream that flowers weren't the same as presents, that a business meeting wasn't more important than a funeral, that they had no right to show up now when they couldn't be bothered to show up then. But Noah was in the next room. He'd been through enough trauma without witnessing his mother lose control. "Why are you here?" I asked again, my voice steadier than I felt. "We just want to support you," my mother said, her practiced concerned parent face firmly in place. "In your time of need." Before I could respond, Michael's car pulled into the driveway. My family took advantage of the distraction to push past me into the house, acting for all the world like they had every right to be there. The reading itself was straightforward. David had always been meticulous about his affairs. He'd updated his will after his diagnosis, making sure Noah and I would be secure. Besides our home, he'd left us 3 rental properties he'd renovated over the years, a substantial life insurance policy, and trust funds for Noah's education and future. David had been smart with money, investing in real estate early in his career. We'd lived modestly compared to what we could afford because he'd wanted to build something lasting. "Security isn't sexy," he'd joked once, "but it lets you sleep at night." I watched my family's faces as Michael detailed the assets. My father's eyebrows rose higher with each property mentioned. Stacy's expression shifted from bored to calculating. My mother's perfectly manicured hand reached for my arm, squeezing it in what anyone else might have interpreted as comfort. "We had no idea David was so established," my father said when Michael finished, his voice carrying a new note of respect that made my skin crawl. After the lawyer left, my family cornered me in the kitchen while Noah was showing his grandparents a Lego creation upstairs. "Barbara," Stacy said, her voice honey-sweet, "we should talk about those properties." I crossed my arms. "What about them?" "Well," she leaned against the counter, "the downtown condo would be perfect for me. I'm looking to move closer to the office and it would really help with my commute." I stared at her, waiting for the punchline. It didn't come. "You want me to give you David's property, the one he spent months renovating himself?" Stacy rolled her eyes. "It's not like you need 3 rental properties. You've got this big house, the life insurance. Noah's just a kid, he doesn't even know what he has. Meanwhile, I'm trying to build something. My company needs me to be in the city." My mother stepped forward, placing her hand on my arm again. "Sweetie, family helps family. Stacy could really use this boost right now. And I couldn't use your support at my husband's funeral." The words escaped before I could stop them. "That was different," my father waved dismissively. "Business opportunities don't wait." Stacy couldn't reschedule that meeting. "But a funeral could wait." My voice rose despite my efforts to stay calm. "David waited for you. For 18 months he asked about you, wondered why his in-laws barely visited, why his son's grandparents couldn't be bothered to show up. Now, Barbara," my mother's voice took on a warning tone, "let's not get dramatic. We sent cards, we called." 3 times, I cut in. "You visited 3 times in 18 months. David's parents flew across the country every other week. His friends organized meal trains and hospital visits and playdates for Noah. Where were you?" With Stacy, my father said, as if this explained everything. She needed us. And I didn't, Noah didn't, Stacy huffed impatiently. This isn't getting us anywhere. Look, just sign over the downtown condo. You can keep the other properties if you're going to be so selfish about it. The word selfish broke something loose inside me. 10 years of marriage, 18 months of watching my husband wither away, 1 week of planning his funeral alone, and now they wanted his property. They hadn't even bothered to ask how Noah was coping. Get out, I said quietly. What? Stacy scoffed. Get out of my house. My voice was steadier now, cold and clear. David is gone, you didn't come to his funeral, and now you want his property. Get out. The last 2 words came out as a shout echoing through the kitchen. Upstairs, the chatter of Lego building paused. Barbara, my mother gasped, you can't be serious, we're your family. No, Robert's voice came from the doorway. David's father stood there, his kind face hardened with anger. We're her family, and I think you should leave. Janet appeared beside him, her arm around Noah, who looked confused and frightened. She shot me a supportive look before guiding my son back upstairs. This isn't over, Stacy hissed as they gathered their things. You've always been jealous of me, and now you're just being spiteful. My father shook his head in disappointment. Your husband would have wanted family unity, Barbara. Think about what you're doing. I let out a hollow laugh. Don't you dare tell me what David would have wanted. You didn't know him, you never tried to. After they left, I sat on the kitchen floor and sobbed. Robert found me there 10 minutes later, curled into myself like a wounded animal. You did the right thing, he said, lowering himself stiffly to sit beside me. David would be proud of you for standing up for yourself and Noah. I leaned against his shoulder. I just never thought, even after all these years, I never thought they'd be this cruel. Some people only show up when there's something in it for them, he said simply. The next morning, my phone lit up with a text from my mother. Barbara, darling, let's not fight. We're all grieving David in our own way. Family should stick together in times like these. Let's talk about those properties when you're feeling less emotional. I turned off my phone without responding. 3 days later, I got another text, this time from Stacy. The silent treatment is childish, Barbara. We're trying to help you. Managing multiple properties while raising a child alone is going to be too much for you. Let people who know what they're doing handle the business side of things. Again, I didn't respond, but I did call a property management company that David had worked with before. They agreed to take over the day-to-day operations of the rentals, leaving me free to focus on Noah and healing. A week went by, then 2. I thought maybe they'd finally gotten the message. I was wrong. One evening, while scrolling through Facebook, I saw a post from my mother that made my blood run cold. Hard times reveal true colors. So heartbroken that my daughter has inherited wealth and now refuses to help her struggling sister. Money changes people, rarely for the better. The comments section was flooded with sympathetic responses from distant relatives and family friends, most of whom hadn't bothered to attend David's funeral either. She always was the difficult one. Stacy has worked so hard for everything, while some people just get lucky. Praying your family can heal from this selfish behavior. My hands shook as I stared at the screen. They were painting me as the villain, the greedy widow hoarding her dead husband's wealth, the selfish sister refusing to help family, and people were believing it. I called Janet that night, my voice breaking as I explained what was happening. She listened patiently, then said something that changed everything. Barbara, honey, they can only control the narrative if you let them. She was right. For years, my entire life, I'd let my family define who I was, the lesser daughter, the one who needed to try harder, be more, accept less. Even in grief, I was allowing them to shape how others saw me, no more. I spent the next day gathering evidence. Screenshots of my mother's post about Stacy's celebration, timestamped during David's funeral, text messages showing their dismissive responses when he was diagnosed, photos of the empty chairs at the funeral where family should have sat. Then I wrote my own post. I've been silent out of respect for my late husband and my grieving son, but I can't allow lies to go unchallenged. Here's the truth about family loyalty. I attached the screenshots one by one, the celebration during the funeral, the 3 brief hospital visits in 18 months, the texts demanding property after the will reading. Finally, a recording of Stacy's voice from my kitchen. Noah's just a kid, he doesn't even know what he has. My husband David spent his final months worrying about our son's future. He worked hard his entire life to provide security for his family. That wasn't luck, it was sacrifice and planning. I won't apologize for protecting what he built for our child. True family shows up, not just when there's something to gain, but when it's hard, when it's inconvenient, when it hurts. To those who have supported us through this darkness, who brought food, who sat with us in the hospital, who played with Noah when I couldn't stop crying, you are a real family. Blood makes you related. Loyalty makes you family. I'm done being silent. I'm done being second best. And I'm done apologizing for putting my son first. I posted it, then turned off notifications and went to sit on the back porch swing that David had built the summer before his diagnosis. The same swing where we'd watched countless sunsets, where he'd held me when the treatments weren't working, where he'd made me promise to live fiercely after he was gone. The fallout was swift and massive. Friends and acquaintances rallied around me, sharing their own observations of how my family had treated me over the years. David's colleagues posted memories of how my parents had skipped our wedding rehearsal dinner for a charity gala Stacy was hosting. Former classmates recalled how my achievements had always been downplayed next to hers. Stacy's investors saw the posts. They weren't pleased to learn that their new business partner had pressured a recent widow for property instead of attending her brother-in-law's funeral. The family-first image she'd cultivated for her brand suddenly seemed hollow. My phone rang constantly for days. I let it all go to voicemail. The only calls I returned were from Noah's therapist and David's parents. My father was the first to show up at my door a week after my post went viral within our social circle. "You've made a spectacle of our family," he said, not bothering with a greeting when I opened the door. "Your mother is devastated. Stacy's reputation is damaged. Was that your goal, to hurt us?" I studied him, the man who had once been my hero, who had taught me to ride a bike and checked for monsters under my bed. Somewhere along the way, he had stopped seeing me. Perhaps he never truly had. "My goal was to tell the truth," I said simply, "something this family has never been good at. We can still fix this," he insisted. "Take down the post, tell everyone it was a misunderstanding, that grief made you lash out. We can move past this." "Can we? Because from where I'm standing, there's nothing to move past. You've made your priorities clear my entire life. The only difference now is that I'm no longer pretending it doesn't hurt." He straightened his shoulders, falling back on the authoritative father role that had worked when I was younger. "This isn't what David would have wanted. David wanted Noah to grow up knowing his worth," I said calmly, "to never accept less than he deserves. I'm finally following his example." After he left, more attempts at reconciliation followed. Stacy sent a carefully worded apology that managed to include phrases like "if you felt hurt" and "never my intention." My mother tried emotional manipulation, claiming the stress was affecting her health. Distant relatives called to mediate, though their version of mediation seemed to involve me apologizing and giving Stacy what she wanted. I held firm. For perhaps the first time in my life, I refused to bend, to accommodate, to put myself last. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about Noah, about honoring the life David and I had built, about teaching my son that love doesn't come with conditions. 6 months after David's death, Noah and I settled into a new rhythm. The rental properties provided steady income, managed by professionals who sent me monthly reports. I returned to work part-time as a graphic designer, something I could do from home while Noah was at school. Janet and Robert visited often, filling our home with warmth and laughter. My family made one final attempt at reconciliation, or rather, at damage control. Stacy's business was struggling, partly due to the hit her reputation had taken. She needed money, and apparently I was still the easiest target. They arrived unannounced on a Sunday afternoon. Noah was at a playdate and I was in the backyard replanting David's vegetable garden. "Barbara," my mother called through the screen door, "we need to talk." I continued digging, pressing the spade into the rich soil with perhaps more force than necessary. "I've said everything I have to say." They came outside anyway, Stacy hanging back while my parents approached. "Your sister's company is in trouble," my father said without preamble. "The investors pulled out." I looked up, shielding my eyes from the sun. And she needs help," my mother inserted, her voice taking on that familiar coaxing tone. "Just a loan until she gets back on her feet, we thought, with the rental income you have." No, I returned to my digging. Barbara, be reasonable, Stacy finally spoke. This feud has gone on long enough, we're family. I stood up slowly, brushing dirt from my hands. You know what I remember, Stacy? I remember being 8 years old, saving up my allowance for 6 months to buy a new bike. And when I finally got it, you told Dad it wasn't safe and he gave it to you instead. I remember being 16, getting accepted to that summer art program, and Mom saying I couldn't go because they needed to use the money for your college apartment. I took a step closer to them, feeling oddly calm. I remember David in the hospital asking why my parents never visited and making excuses for you because I couldn't bear to tell him the truth, that you simply didn't care enough to show up. That's not fair, my mother protested weakly. What's not fair, I continued as if she hadn't spoken, is that you think you can ignore me my entire life and then show up with your hand out when you need something. That's not family, that's just using people. Stacy's face hardened. So that's it? You're just going to let my business fail because of some childhood grudges? I shook my head. No, your business is failing because you put more effort into extracting property from your grieving sister than into running your company. That's on you. They left eventually after more arguments and accusations and finally threats. My father's parting words, "You'll regret this when you need us," rang hollow. I'd already needed them many times over. They had never been there. That evening, as Noah and I sat on David's swing watching the sunset, my son looked up at me with his father's eyes. Are Grandma and Grandpa Martin mad at us? He asked. I chose my words carefully. They're mad at me, not you. Sometimes people have different ideas about what family means. He considered this. Like how Grandma and Grandpa Wilson come to my baseball games even though they live far away. Exactly like that, buddy. He leaned against me, his small body warm against mine. Dad would be proud of you, Mom. You're really brave. I hugged him close, my heart swelling. David had always seen me clearly. Now finally I was seeing myself through his eyes, strong, worthy enough. The last time I heard from my family was a Christmas card addressed only to Noah with a check enclosed and a note saying they didn't want him to suffer because of adult disagreements. I returned it unopened. Instead, we spent the holidays with David's parents and our chosen family, friends who had stood by us through cancer and grief and rebuilding. People who showed up not because of obligation or expectation of reward, but because they genuinely cared. Some nights, I still find myself talking to David in the quiet darkness of our bedroom, telling him about Noah's latest achievement, about the garden flourishing under my clumsy care, about the strength I didn't know I had until I was forced to find it. I miss you, I whisper to the empty side of the bed. Every day, every minute, but I'm keeping my promise, we're living fiercely. And somewhere I like to think he's smiling that crinkly-eyed smile and saying what he always said, that I was never second best to anyone, that I was his first choice every day. He was right all along.